My name is Jasmine Rivera, and 2 weeks before my wedding, my father called to say he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. He said it calmly, like he was rescheduling an oil change. Your sister's celebration landed the same day, he added, as if a party could simply outrank a promise. I stared at the RSVP board on the wall, the pins marking flights. The violinist Ethan's mother begged me to book because Pachelbel makes her cry. My thumb slid over a smear of frosting on a sample menu, and I heard my voice come out too flat. So you're choosing Erica's party? It's important to her career, he said. I'll try to make the reception. The line went quiet. Behind me, the kettle clicked off. Outside, Portland rain worked the window like someone tapping to be let in. I thought of the rehearsal where he'd practice offering his arm, the moment the doors would open, the hush that would follow. In my head, he'd always be there, steady, right where the carpet turned white. I set the phone down so gently it felt like a trick and walked to the sink. The bouquet samples Ethan had brought home were leaning in a mason jar, heavy with peonies. They smelled like a memory I couldn't reach. Erica had texted me an hour earlier. Biggest day of my career. Can't wait to celebrate at noon on the 20th. The 20th. My 4 p.m. wedding. No apology. No mention of the 8 months of planning she'd known about. I touched the glass jar, cool against my fingers, and felt something shift. Not the shatter of heartbreak, but the slow burn of recognition. This wasn't about logistics or timing. It was about being asked, again, to understand why I didn't come first. And this time, I wasn't sure I would. I grew up in a cedar-sided house at the end of Juniper Street in Bend, Oregon, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew who mowed their own lawn and who paid teenagers $20 to do it. My earliest memories of that house smell like my mother's lemon bars cooling on the counter and the faint whiff of sawdust from my father's workshop in the garage. Back then, my father, Michael Rivera, was the center of my little universe. He was the one who steadied my bike while I wobbled down the street, the one who pointed out constellations from the back deck until the mosquitoes drove us inside. My mother, Carol, balanced him out with quiet warmth. She was the kind of woman who remembered every neighbor's birthday and sent handwritten thank you notes for even the smallest kindness. My older sister Erica was a storm in comparison, full of energy, full of opinions, and full of ways to get exactly what she wanted. We were, for a while, the sort of family people envied, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. Things shifted the summer I turned 12. My mother began complaining about fatigue and stomach pain. By autumn, the word cancer had landed in our lives like a brick through glass. Stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that didn't leave room for pretending. The months that followed were a blur of hospital rooms, whispered conversations in hallways, and casseroles left at the front door. I watched my vibrant, laughing mother shrink into someone the wind could blow away. When she passed, the silence in our house was unbearable. My father buried himself in work at a construction management firm, often leaving before sunrise and coming home long after dark. I think it was his way of running from the emptiness, but it also meant that someone had to take over the role of woman of the house. Erica, at 15, slipped into that role with an eagerness that should have worried me. She started cooking dinner, microwaved lasagna, mostly, and telling me when my chores weren't up to Dad's standards. She decided which bills to leave on the counter for him to see, which phone calls to pass along, which messages to handle herself. At first, I thought she was just trying to help, but it didn't take long to notice that her version of events rarely matched mine. If I asked when Dad might be home for dinner, she'd scold me for being needy and remind me how stressed he was. If I mentioned my upcoming school concert, she'd sigh and tell me not to expect him. He was too busy and didn't need the guilt trip. The distance between my father and me grew in ways I couldn't measure. He started seeing me through her lens, the quiet, overly sensitive younger daughter who needed to toughen up. One night, about a year after Mom died, I was sitting at the kitchen table working on a science fair project, measuring how different soil types affected bean sprout growth, when I overheard Erica on the phone in the hallway. "She doesn't care if you come," she was saying. "Actually, she thinks it might make her nervous if you're in the front row." My stomach turned cold. She could only be talking to one person. The next evening at the science fair, I stood alone in front of my trifold display, smiling stiffly as judges passed by. Other kids had parents taking pictures, offering hugs. I had an empty spot in the audience and a text from Dad. "Sorry, work dinner." "Good luck." I tried not to cry as I packed up my materials that night, but the tears came anyway on the bus ride home. High school didn't get easier. Erica excelled in volleyball, track, and anything that involved a crowd. She thrived on applause and managed to turn every family conversation back to her achievements. I stayed in the background, finding solace in art and literature, building a world in my head where recognition didn't have to be fought for. By the time I left for college in Seattle, the gap between my father and me felt like an uncrossable canyon. We spoke on the phone once a month, usually about practical things, grades, rent, whether my car needed servicing. He never asked about the art shows I participated in or the late nights I spent painting in my dorm's makeshift studio. When I graduated and took a job in Portland, I made a conscious choice to keep my visits home short. Holidays, the occasional long weekend. Erica still lived in Bend, now working in real estate, and she'd positioned herself as Dad's indispensable companion, helping him with bills, planning his vacations, keeping him company. Every time I came home, she found a way to remind me that she was the one there, while I was the one who left. There was a Sunday dinner 2 years ago that stands out like a warning sign I ignored. I'd driven in for the weekend, hoping to spend some one-on-one time with Dad. When I arrived, Erica was already there, plating up steaks and telling a story about closing a big property deal. Dad listened, laughed at her punchlines, poured her wine. When I tried to talk about a marketing campaign I'd just wrapped, a project I was genuinely proud of, he nodded once and glanced at his phone. "That's nice, Jazz," he said, using the nickname only Mom ever made sound affectionate. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of Erica's stories and my own quiet frustration. Driving back to Portland the next morning, I told myself I'd stop expecting more. But expectations are tricky things. They lie in wait, ready to ambush you at the worst possible moment. The moment for me came after Ethan proposed. He'd planned it perfectly, an evening walk through the Japanese garden, the air smelling faintly of pine and rain, and a ring tucked into the center of a paper crane he'd folded himself. I said yes with tears in my eyes, imagining our families together, the rows of chairs, the music, the moment Dad would offer his arm, and we'd walk toward the life I'd chosen. For a while, I let myself believe in that picture. Looking back, maybe that was the last time I saw my family the way I wanted them to be, rather than the way they actually were. Because 2 weeks before my wedding, that picture shattered with a single phone call. And nothing, absolutely nothing, about the way I saw my father, my sister, or myself would ever be the same. When Ethan and I set our wedding date for June 20th, I thought we'd been generous. 8 full months of notice for everyone we loved. We sent save-the-date cards that I'd designed myself, a watercolor of the historic garden in Portland, where the ceremony would be held. I even called my father personally before the cards went out, just to make sure the date worked for him. "It's on my calendar," he'd said, his voice almost warm. When I asked if he would walk me down the aisle, there had been a pause, brief, but long enough for me to hear the emotion in it. "I'd be honored, Jasmine." For weeks afterward, I held on to that moment like it was proof that the years of distance could be bridged. The first hints of trouble came in spring, about 3 months before the wedding. I noticed Erica posting on social media about a big celebration she was planning. She never said what it was for, just vague captions about venues and catering. When I finally called to ask, she breezed past my questions. "It's just something for work. Don't worry about it." I tried to let it go, but as the weeks passed, her posts became more pointed. Photos of the country club, mentions of a June event. My gut started to tighten. Then, one Sunday afternoon, she called. "I wanted to let you know before you saw it online," she said in a voice sugar-sweet and edged with something sharper. "I'm hosting a career celebration on June 20th. Finally hit my sales target for broker status, and the firm is throwing me a huge party." My fingers went cold around the phone. "That's my wedding day." She made a show of surprise. "Is it?" "Well, mine's at 11 so it should be fine. Dad can come to both." "It's a 2-hour drive between your country club and my venue. Erica, he's supposed to be with me before the ceremony." She didn't miss a beat. "I'm sure he'll figure it out. He's proud of me, Jasmine. This is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement." When we hung up, I called my father immediately, hoping he'd see through her. "Yes, she mentioned it," he said casually. "Unfortunate timing. But these work events are hard to reschedule. I'll make it work. Go to hers for a bit, then head to yours." The problem was, a bit at Erica's parties was never just a bit. She would keep him talking, make him feel guilty for leaving. I could already see it happening, over the next few weeks. His tone shifted. He started asking if we could push the ceremony back an hour, if I really needed him for pre-wedding photos, if someone else could handle the walk. Each time, I told him no. We'd planned this carefully, and I wanted him there. Each time, his reluctance grew. 2 weeks before the wedding, the call came. "I've been thinking about the logistics," he said, his voice clipped. "I don't think I can make it to the ceremony on time. Erica's event is important for her career, and I need to be there for her." The words landed heavy. Final. "So you're not walking me down the aisle," I said, my voice steady only because I was holding it there. "It's not about choosing," he replied. "It's about timing. Maybe Ethan's dad could do it, or a friend's father. You'll still have someone." I don't remember ending the call. I remember the silence afterward, the way the house seemed to tilt, the ache in my chest that wasn't quite heartbreak. It was something colder, like frost creeping into old cracks. Ethan found me at the kitchen table an hour later, staring at the day of schedule we'd printed. He read the look on my face before I could speak. "He's not coming?" "He'll try to make the reception," I said. The words tasted bitter. Ethan sat down across from me. "We could move the date," he offered quietly. "Give him no excuse." "That's exactly what she wants," I said, sharper than I meant to. "She's been pulling him away from me for years. I'm not rearranging my wedding so she can win." Still, the question hung between us. What now? Who would be at my side when those doors opened? The answer came from someone I hadn't expected. A few days later, Ethan's mom, Marilyn, called to check on final details. She heard the strain in my voice and coaxed the story out of me. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said slowly, "my younger brother, David, walked me down the aisle when our father refused. He understood what that meant, because he'd been turned away himself once. I remembered David from family gatherings, a retired literature professor with a gentle laugh and a way of listening that made you feel seen. I don't know if he'd want to." My voice trailed off. "Ask him," Marilyn said simply. "You might be surprised." That night, I sat at my desk with my phone in my hand for a long time before dialing. David answered on the second ring, his voice warm. "David," I began, "I know this might sound strange, but would you consider walking me down the aisle?" There was a pause, and then a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Jasmine, I would be honored, more than you know." In that moment, some of the weight on my chest eased, not because it fixed what my father had done, but because it reminded me that family could also be chosen. I met David for coffee the following Saturday at a little bookshop cafe, tucked into a side street in the Alberta Arts District. It smelled like ground beans and old paper, a combination that felt safe in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a stack of used novels beside him, a scarf draped loosely around his neck, despite the mild weather. "I took the liberty of ordering for you," he said with a small smile, sliding a vanilla latte across the table. "Extra shot, right?" That small detail caught me off guard. We'd spoken at family gatherings before, but I hadn't realized he paid attention like that. For the first few minutes, we talked about nothing important. How the rain had been relentless this spring. How Ethan was settling into his new project at work. Then, I told him what had happened. All of it. Erica's call, my father's growing reluctance, the final conversation where he'd said he wouldn't be there. David listened without interruption, his hands loosely clasped around his cup. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I understand more than you might think," he said. "When I graduated college, my father refused to attend the ceremony because I chose literature instead of going into the family construction business. He said he couldn't watch me throw away my future." He gave a humorless chuckle. "Some wounds leave a scar, even when you think you've moved past them." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken histories between us. "That's why it matters to me," he continued. "To show up, for people I care about. You shouldn't have to walk into one of the biggest moments of your life alone." The certainty in his voice made my throat tighten. "Thank you." I managed. From that day forward, David became part of the wedding in ways I hadn't anticipated. He came to the final dress fitting, telling me I looked like someone worth writing poetry about in my lace gown. He learned the order of the procession so well, he could have conducted it himself. He even insisted on polishing the shoes he planned to wear. Because the details matter. Ethan watched all of this quietly, a faint smile playing on his lips whenever he caught my eye. One night, after David had left our apartment following a planning session, Ethan said, "You know, he's not just doing this for you. I think it matters to him, too." The week before the wedding, the air in our apartment was thick with flowers and last-minute errands. I tried to keep my mind on the logistics, seating charts, vendor confirmations, the weather forecast, but underneath it all was the ache of my father's absence. I called him 3 days before the ceremony. "Are you still planning to come to the reception?" I asked. "Probably around 7:30 or 8, he said, his tone distracted. "Depends on when Erica's thing wraps up." I hesitated. "I've asked David to walk me down the aisle." A pause. Then, "Well, someone has to do it if I can't." The dismissiveness in his voice stung more than I wanted to admit. We ended the call quickly, neither of us saying what we really wanted to. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a rarity for Portland in June. My bridesmaids filled the hotel suite with laughter and the scent of hairspray. The makeup artist worked her magic, while my friend Lila poured mimosas, careful to keep my glass half full so I wouldn't tip into nerves. At noon, there was a knock on the door. When Lila opened it, David stood there in a perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo, holding a small wrapped box. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, stepping inside. "I just wanted to give you something before things get busy." Inside the box was a delicate handkerchief edged with lace, embroidered with tiny blue forget-me-nots. "It was my mother's," David said. "She carried it on her wedding day. Something old, something blue." I traced the stitching with my fingertip, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "There's more," he said, producing a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver bracelet with a charm shaped like a paintbrush crossed with a fountain pen. "Marilyn remembered you telling her how you loved both painting and writing as a kid. She thought you might like a reminder of that creative spirit today." I had no words for a moment. The people who weren't related to me by blood had managed to make me feel more seen than my own father ever had. When it was time to head downstairs, David offered his arm. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," I said, looping my hand through his. The garden was bathed in late afternoon light, the air carrying the scent of roses from the trellises. Through the open doors, I saw Ethan standing beneath the arch, his eyes searching for me. The music began. Pachelbel's canon, just like Ethan's mother had wanted. And we stepped forward. Walking down that aisle with David beside me, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Gratitude for the man who had shown up, sorrow for the one who hadn't, and a fierce determination that this moment would not be defined by absence. Ethan's expression as I reached him was worth every ounce of pain that had led here. Pure love, steady and unshaken. The ceremony unfolded like something out of a dream. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to choose each other every day. The applause that followed wrapped around us like an embrace. By the time we made it to the reception, I'd almost managed to forget the looming shadow of my father's inevitable late arrival. But when Daniel, my cousin from my mother's side, appeared halfway through dinner, the past came rushing back. "I went to Erica's first," he admitted when I asked why he was late. "Jasmine, it wasn't a work event. It was just a small party at her apartment. 15 people, maybe. And she's been telling your dad for months that you didn't really want him here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table. "She said that?" Daniel nodded grimly. "I've got the texts. She planned it this way, so he'd have to choose her." I stared at him, the noise of the reception fading into a distant hum. All those years I'd wondered if I was imagining it, if I was being too sensitive. Now I had proof. David found me a few minutes later, concern in his eyes. "Everything okay?" "Not yet," I said, glancing toward the door. "But it will be." Because sooner or later, the truth had a way of showing up, too. The reception was in full swing when I saw him, my father, walking into the ballroom like someone who'd wandered into the wrong event. His suit was rumpled, his tie crooked, as if he'd put it on in the car. He scanned the room, eyes pausing briefly on the band before finding me across the dance floor. Ethan noticed at the same time and leaned close. "Do you want me to handle this?" I shook my head. "No, I need to." I crossed the room, my dress whispering against the floor, each step heavier than it should have been. He met me halfway, gift bag in hand. "Congratulations," he said stiffly, leaning in for a hug that felt like a formality. "Sorry I'm late. Erica's thing went longer than expected." Longer than expected. The words lodged somewhere between my ribs. I thought of Daniel's voice in my ear an hour earlier, of the texts on his phone, of the 15 people in Erica's apartment laughing over cheap champagne. "I'm glad you could make it for the last hour," I said, letting the edge in my tone stand. If he noticed, he didn't say. He handed me the bag. Inside was a boxed set of crystal wine glasses. "From Erica and me," he added. "Thanks," I said, setting it on a nearby table without opening it. "Want a drink? The bar's still open." At the bar, while the bartender poured his scotch, he glanced toward the head table. "So, who walked you down the aisle?" "David Brooks," I said, my voice steady. His brows drew together. "The older gentleman in the tuxedo who gave that toast?" "Yes." "You had a stranger walk you instead of your own father?" I turned toward him fully. "He's not a stranger to me. He's been part of Ethan's family for years, and he's shown up for me more than you have in a very long time." His face reddened. "That's not fair. Jasmine, I've always supported you." I almost laughed. "You missed my science fair because Erica told you I didn't want you there. You skipped my graduation dinner until Marilyn reminded you. And today, you skipped my wedding ceremony for a party that wasn't even real." His glass paused halfway to his lips. "What do you mean, not real?" Daniel appeared beside me then, almost like he'd been waiting for the cue. "It wasn't a work event. Uncle Mike, I was there, just a casual get-together at her place. No promotion, no company sponsorship." "That's not possible," my father said, shaking his head. "She told me." "She lied," Daniel said gently. "And I can prove it." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to the messages. I watched my father's eyes move over the screen. his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something dangerously close to shame. She said you told her you didn't want me there," he murmured. "I never said that," I replied. "I've always wanted you there. You just never believed me." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the exit, pulling his phone from his pocket. David materialized at my side as if he'd been keeping watch. "You all right?" "I don't know yet." Across the room, my father's voice rose, sharp, clipped, into his phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could guess. Moments later, he came back, face flushed. "She hung up on me. I'm going to her place right now." "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice low. "This can wait until tomorrow. This is my wedding reception." "I need to know the truth tonight," he insisted. "You already know it," Daniel said quietly. My father looked between us, then at David. His eyes narrowed. "So you replaced me with him? Some old man you barely know?" David stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Rivera, I understand you're upset, but being a father isn't about holding a title. It's about showing up when it matters most. Jasmine asked me because she needed someone who would be there without question. I was honored to do it." "Don't tell me how to be a father," my dad snapped. David didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you should have acted like one." The silence that followed felt like it could crack the floor. My father's shoulders slumped just slightly, his gaze flicking away. "I need to go," he muttered, and without another word, he left the ballroom. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling the stares of guests who'd caught parts of the exchange. Ethan came over, his arm sliding around my waist. "You okay?" I nodded, though my throat was tight. "I just wish he'd seen it sooner." We rejoined the reception, the music pulling people back onto the dance floor, for the sparkler send-off. David stood beside me and Ethan, his hand steady at my back as we ran through the tunnel of light. I couldn't shake the thought that he had been the one to make sure this night wasn't defined by absence. Later, when Ethan and I finally got back to our hotel room, my phone buzzed with 3 missed calls from my father and one from an unknown number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them. I wanted one night where the only thing I carried was the joy of marrying the man I loved. The next morning, before we left for our honeymoon, I checked my voicemail. My father's voice was rougher than usual. "Jasmine." I went to Erica's. She admitted it, all of it. The lies, the party, the messages. "I can't believe I didn't see it. I'm so sorry I missed your wedding. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I hope one day you'll let me make it right." I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone warm in my hand, Ethan watching me from the doorway. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I need time to figure out if I even want to rebuild what's been broken for so long." On the plane to Maui, I turned my phone off completely. The ocean, when we arrived, was the perfect distraction, endless and patient. For 2 weeks, I let myself exist in a world where family drama was as far away as the mainland. But I knew it was waiting for me. When we got home, there were more messages from my father, each more apologetic than the last. Erica hadn't contacted me at all. Daniel sent a quick text to check in, adding that my dad had been avoiding most people in Bend, like he's embarrassed to be seen. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. What I did know was that the confrontation at my reception had cracked something open that could never be closed again. The truth was out. My father couldn't unhear it, and I couldn't go back to wondering if I was imagining it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of their version of events. I had my own, and it was real. That was something I could build on if I chose to. The first few weeks after our honeymoon felt like a different kind of limbo. Part married bliss, part unfinished business. The photographs from the wedding arrived, each frame catching some version of joy. Ethan's grin when he saw me at the aisle. Marilyn wiping her eyes during the vows. David's steady smile as he handed me over. But in every set, there was a blank space where my father should have been. We printed a few for the living room. careful not to choose ones that made the absence too loud. Still, I noticed Ethan linger sometimes over the group shots, his gaze flicking to that empty space at my left. By the third week, I had listened to my father's voicemails enough to know them by heart. He kept circling the same words. "I'm sorry. I should have been there. I didn't know." I believed the last one, at least. I believed that Erica's version of the truth had been easier for him to accept than confronting his own neglect. But knowing that didn't erase the years it had cost me. One Sunday afternoon, David called. "Just checking in," he said, as if he could sense I'd been avoiding the decision. We talked about books for a while. He was rereading To Kill a Mockingbird, finding new things in it as he got older. Then his tone shifted. "Have you decided what you'll do about your father?" I looked at the half-folded laundry on the couch, the life I was building that didn't seem to have room for old wounds. "Not yet. I don't even know where to start." "Start where you can speak honestly," David said, "and be ready to listen, if you're asking him to do the same." That night, I told Ethan I was ready to meet my father. Not at his house in Bend, not anywhere with old ghosts in the walls. We picked a cafe halfway between Portland and Bend, a place with big windows and small tables that forced you to sit close. He was already there when I arrived, looking older than I remembered, lines deeper, shoulders curved slightly inward. He stood when I approached, an awkward half-smile on his face. "Thank you for coming," he said. We ordered coffee we barely touched. For a while, we just sat, the clatter of cups around us filling the space where small talk should have been. "Finally," he said, "I failed you completely." "Yes," I said, because pretending otherwise would have been another lie between us. "But I want to understand how it happened." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "After your mother died, I didn't know how to be a parent anymore. Erica stepped in, and I was grateful. She handled things, told me what you were doing, what you needed. I didn't realize she was deciding what I knew." "She told you I didn't want you at my events," I said quietly. He nodded. "Said it would embarrass you, or make you nervous, or that you didn't care, and I believed her. It was easier than asking you directly, because then I'd have to face why you might not want me there. I thought about that, how avoidance could feel like self-protection to the person doing it, and abandonment to the person left behind. I never wanted you gone," I said. "Even when I stopped coming home much, I just couldn't keep being erased." His eyes dropped to the table. "I see that now, and I hate that it took your wedding for me to hear you." We talked for nearly 3 hours, sifting through the years like old photographs, deciding which ones to keep and which to set aside. He admitted that confronting Erica after the wedding had been messy. She denied, deflected, finally admitting to maybe exaggerating. He hadn't seen her since. "I want to try," he said as we stood to leave, "to be in your life in a way that matters." "I'll think about it," I told him, and meant it. Over the next month, we spoke once a week. Sometimes the calls were awkward, 5 minutes about the weather and his dog, then a polite goodbye. Other times, he surprised me by remembering details I'd shared, asking about my work or a book I'd mentioned. When I told David about the progress, he smiled. "Bridges are built one plank at a time. Jasmine, just make sure the foundation's solid." 3 months after that cafe meeting, my father invited Ethan and me to dinner at his place. "I'd like to do it right," he said, "and I'd like David to come, too." The evening was tentative at first, like everyone was afraid of stepping on an old bruise, but something shifted after dinner, when I found the two of them, David and my father, talking quietly in the living room. "I want to thank you," my father was saying, "for being there for her when I wasn't. Walking her down the aisle should have been my privilege. You did it with honor." David inclined his head. "She's a remarkable young woman. You should be proud." "I am," my father said, his voice low. "I just wish I'd been more present to see it happening." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was something, and for the first time, I believed he meant it, driving home that night. Ethan reached for my hand. "That felt Different, he said. It did, I agreed, watching the road unfold in the headlights. Not fixed, but different. And for now, that was enough. The dinner at my father's house didn't magically erase the years between us, but it did mark the first time I'd left Bend without the usual knot in my stomach. That in itself felt like progress. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the tone of our phone calls changing. He began with questions instead of weather updates. How was the marketing campaign going? Had Ethan finished the custom desk he was building for our office? What book was on my nightstand? They were small things, but they mattered. Even so, I kept my boundaries intact. I didn't tell him everything. There were pieces of my life that still felt too fragile to hand over, like the way I still avoided certain songs that reminded me of my mother, or how my chest tightened every time I drove past a father walking his daughter down the sidewalk. David remained a constant presence. His Sunday evening calls a rhythm I looked forward to. Sometimes he'd bring Marilyn and Ethan into the conversation. Other times, it was just the two of us talking about everything from Oregon's wildflower season to the ethics of digital archiving. He never asked directly about my father unless I brought it up. One Sunday in early autumn, he did ask something else. Would you ever invite your father to something you've planned? The question hung there. I don't know, I admitted. I think I'm afraid he'd say no, or worse, he'd come and make it about someone else. Then maybe start with something small, David suggested. A place where you can leave if you need to, but where you give him the chance to choose differently. That chance came sooner than I expected. Our Little Creators Community Program, a spin-off from my marketing firm's charity initiative, was hosting its first youth art exhibit. It wasn't a wedding, but it mattered to me. We'd spent months helping underfunded schools bring art back into their classrooms, and now the kids' work would hang in a real gallery for one weekend. I sent my father an email with the details. It was deliberate. Emails gave me control over the wording and avoided the too fast concessions that could happen on the phone. No pressure, I wrote. But if you want to come, it would mean a lot to the kids. I didn't say it, but it would mean something to me, too. He replied the next day. I'd like to be there. Send me the time. On the day of the exhibit, I walked into the converted warehouse space with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The walls were alive with color, murals, photographs, collages. The kids had dressed up for the occasion, standing proudly beside their work as parents and neighbors drifted by. An hour in, I felt a tap on my shoulder. My father stood there in a sport coat I'd never seen before, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. These are for you, he said. I wasn't sure what your favorite was anymore. Sunflowers had been my mother's favorite. I accepted them with a quiet thank you, too startled to say more. He stayed for the full 2 hours, talking with the kids, asking questions about their work. When one shy fourth grader hesitated to explain her sculpture, he knelt beside her display and listened until she found the words. I caught the moment in a photo without him noticing. As we were packing up, he said, "You've built something good here, Jasmine. I'm proud of you." It was a simple sentence, but I carried it home like a fragile artifact. Later that week, Ethan and I invited him to dinner in Portland. We kept it casual, take-out Thai, jazz on the speakers. David joined us, and the four of us sat at the table trading stories about everything from Ben's early snow to Ethan's ill-fated attempt at growing tomatoes on our balcony. At one point, my father looked at David and said, "I've been thinking about that day at the reception. I didn't like what you said then. But you were right." David didn't gloat. He just inclined his head. I wasn't trying to be right. I was trying to be honest. I realized then that part of why this fragile rebuilding was working was because of David's presence, not as a replacement for my father, but as a witness, someone who had seen me in the years I felt unseen, and who now saw my father trying. When the evening ended, my father lingered at the door. "Thank you for inviting me," he said. "I'd like to do it again sometime." Driving him to his hotel, I thought about how trust wasn't something you handed over all at once. It was shaped, like clay, a little at a time. You worked it with your hands, and sometimes it cracked. But if you kept at it, it could hold its form. I wasn't ready to say we'd finished shaping ours, but for the first time, I wanted to keep trying. It was late October when Erica's name showed up on my phone for the first time since the wedding. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, wondering if answering would be a mistake. In the end, I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short, almost clipped. "Dad says you've been doing some kind of art program. I'd like to see it. Call me." I played it twice, listening for subtext. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the damage she'd done. Still, something in me was curious. Maybe it was the same stubborn thread that had me agreeing to meet my father in that cafe, months ago. When I told Ethan, he raised an eyebrow. "You don't owe her that." "I know," I said, "but I want to see what she's really after." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my office. She walked in wearing a cream coat and oversized sunglasses, like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. For a moment, it was like no time had passed. She still moved like she owned every room she entered. "Jasmine," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look good?" "Thanks," I replied, my tone neutral. She launched into a story about her latest real estate deal, a client in Lake Oswego who wanted a mid-century remodel. I listened for 2 minutes before cutting in. "You said you wanted to see the program." Her smile faltered. "Right. I thought maybe I could volunteer, help the kids with presentation skills or something." I waited for the catch. "Why?" She shrugged. "Dad's been talking about it, and I've been thinking about how things went down at your wedding." This was the moment, I thought, the chance for her to own it. But instead, she said, "You know how competitive I am. I didn't mean for it to blow up like that." "You didn't mean for it?" My voice was calm, but every word was deliberate. "You scheduled your party for the same day. You told Dad I didn't want him there." She looked away, fiddling with the coffee sleeve. "I exaggerated. I didn't think he'd actually skip it." The air between us felt heavy. I thought about all the years her exaggerations had cost me. "If you want to volunteer," I said finally, "you start like everyone else. Background check, orientation, 2-month trial. No special treatment because you're my sister." Her lips parted, as if she'd expected a different answer, but she nodded. "Fine." The first time she showed up at the program, she wore the same cream coat, towering over the kids as they practiced introducing themselves. I stayed on the other side of the room, watching. She was awkward at first, too formal, too focused on eye contact, but by the third session, I saw one of the quieter boys laughing at something she said. One afternoon, after the kids left, she lingered by the art tables. "You've got a good thing here," she said. I didn't look up from stacking chairs. "It's not about me, it's about them." She was quiet for a beat. "Still, it's nice." I didn't push. I'd learned that with Erica. You took the small admissions and didn't try to pry them open too fast. By December, she'd kept every commitment. She helped one of the high school girls prepare for a scholarship interview, running mock questions until the girl could answer without looking at her notes. When the acceptance letter came, Erica was the first to show me the photo, beaming alongside the student, the college logo behind them. Dad noticed too. "She's different around the kids," he said one night over the phone. "Less sharp." "Or maybe she just has nothing to gain from them," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I meant it as a compliment or a warning. The week before Christmas, the program hosted a small holiday showcase. Parents and donors milled around, sipping cider, while the kids showed off their projects. Erica stood by the entrance, greeting guests, like she'd been doing it for years. Near the end of the evening, she approached me. "I wrote something," she said, holding out a manila folder. "A communication guide. For the shy kids? Thought it might help." I took it, flipping through pages of tips on posture, breathing, and breaking down answers into clear points. It wasn't perfect. Some of it was straight from self-help books, but it was thoughtful. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She gave a half smile. Don't get used to it. We both laughed, the sound surprising us, driving home that night. I thought about how strange it felt to have her in my orbit without the constant tension. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a ceasefire. And maybe, like with my father, that was the only place to start. January brought an invitation I didn't see coming. My father called one Tuesday evening while Ethan was making dinner. His voice had that careful tone he used when he wasn't sure how I'd take something. I'm hosting a small dinner next month, he said. I'd like you and Ethan to come, and Erica will be there too. I leaned against the counter, watching the steam curl from the pasta pot. Is this about the program? Not exactly. I thought it was time we were all in the same room without an audience or a crisis hanging over us. It took me a few days to answer. But in the end, I agreed. Part of me was curious to see how this tentative truce would play out without the safety net of the kids or a public setting. The night of the dinner, Ethan and I drove to Bend in silence for the first hour, both of us aware that whatever happened could tip the balance we'd been building. The last time I'd been in my father's house with Erica, my mother was still alive, and the air had been heavy with the scent of her cooking. Tonight, the smell of rosemary and garlic drifted out the front door as Dad opened it, smiling nervously. Erica was already there, leaning against the kitchen island with a glass of wine. She wore something understated for once, dark jeans, a soft sweater, and she greeted me without the usual edge. Hey, Jazz. Dinner was roasted chicken with vegetables, the kind of meal my mother used to make on Sundays. Dad tried to keep the conversation light, asking Ethan about work, telling us about a new hiking trail he'd found. Every so often, I'd catch Erica's eyes on me, like she was trying to gauge whether I was ready to spar. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat. I wanted to say something, to both of you. I know I've failed as a father in different ways. I let things go unsaid, and I let someone else's version of events become the truth. I can't change the past, but I want to be better going forward. I glanced at Erica. She was staring at her plate, jaw tight. I've been thinking about that day, Dad continued. The wedding, the choices I made, I'm sorry for all of it. The room was quiet except for the soft clink of Ethan setting his fork down. Finally, Erica spoke. I didn't make it easy for you, or for her. It wasn't an apology, not entirely, but it was more than I'd expected. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The conversation stayed on safe topics for a while. Books, travel plans, the weather. But as the evening wound down, Erica surprised me again. I'm helping one of the girls from the program apply to an internship, she said. I'd like to keep doing that kind of work, if you're okay with it. I studied her face. She seemed genuine, though I'd learned not to take anything at face value. It's not about me being okay with it, I said. It's about showing up for them. She nodded. I will. When Ethan and I finally left, Dad walked us to the door. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. It meant a lot to have you both here. In the car, Ethan let out a breath. That went better than I thought. Better than I thought too, I admitted. But I'm not pretending everything's fixed. No, he said, taking my hand. But you're all in the same room now. That's something. As we drove away, I realized he was right. For years, we'd been 3 separate orbits, me, my father, and Erica, spinning apart from one another. Tonight didn't pull us into a perfect alignment, but it proved we could share the same space without crashing. And for now, that was enough to keep trying. The first real test came in early spring, when our youth art program was invited to partner with the Portland Museum of Contemporary Art for a weekend exhibition. It was the biggest stage we'd ever had, 2 full days in the main atrium, with local press and donors expected to attend. When I told my father and Erica about it, both offered to come without hesitation. On paper, that sounded like progress. In reality, I wasn't sure how the two of them would handle being in the same high-pressure space with me at the center. Ethan sensed my worry as we loaded the car with framed student artwork. If it starts to feel like too much, you give me the look, he said, and I'll run interference. The morning of the event, the museum was already buzzing when we arrived. Volunteers hurried between display stands, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe drifted through the air. The kids, dressed in their best, clustered together in nervous excitement. My father showed up first, wearing a navy blazer and holding a camera that looked brand new. "Figured I'd document the day," he said, almost shyly. He gave a small wave to a few of the kids before stepping back to let them work. Erica arrived 20 minutes later, in a tailored black jumpsuit that somehow managed to look professional and approachable at the same time. "Where do you need me?" she asked, scanning the crowd. I assigned her to the presentation station, where students would explain their work to visitors. It kept her busy and gave her a chance to put her polished communication skills to good use. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. My father wandered between displays, chatting with parents and taking candid shots of the kids. Erica guided a pair of shy middle schoolers through their introductions until they were answering questions on their own. But around midday, as the atrium filled with more people, I saw the subtle shift. The way Erica's voice carried a little louder, her gestures becoming more animated, drawing attention to herself. At the same time, my father lingered nearby, listening but not stepping in. It wasn't overt, not like the old days, but the dynamic was there, the quiet competition for space. During a break, I pulled them both aside to a quieter corner. "This is about the kids," I said plainly. "Not us, not today." Erica's shoulders tensed, but she nodded. My father looked down at his camera strap and muttered, "You're right." After that, something shifted. My father started asking the students about their process, letting them lead the conversation while he photographed their work. Erica began introducing visitors directly to the artists instead of talking over them. By the afternoon, I saw something I hadn't before. Both of them, standing together, listening as a high school sophomore named Marco explained how he'd built a sculpture from reclaimed bike parts. They asked questions, encouraged him, and when he finished, my father clapped him on the shoulder while Erica told him she could see his piece in a gallery one day. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I caught Erica scanning the room for who was watching her, and my father sometimes looked to me for approval in a way that made me uneasy. But it was a start, and it was happening without me forcing it. As the event wound down, a reporter from the Oregon Arts Review approached for an interview. I spoke about the program's origins, the students' hard work, and the community's role in making it possible. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father and Erica standing together near the entrance. Not center stage, not interrupting, just there. When the last guests left and the kids packed up their pieces, my father came over, holding out his camera. "These are yours," he said. "I want you to have the originals." And Erica added, "The guide I wrote? I've updated it. I'll email you the new version." Small gestures, but genuine. That night, back at home, Ethan and I sat on the couch going through the photos. In one, I was talking to a group of kids, hands mid-gesture, while behind me, my father and Erica stood side by side, both looking in my direction. "They're watching you," Ethan said. "Not each other." For the first time, I thought maybe that could last. Conclusion: choosing who stays in the weeks after the museum event. I kept coming back to the small moments, not the big, camera-ready ones, but the quiet gestures that would have been unthinkable not so long ago. My father, pausing to let a shy middle schooler answer a donor's question without interruption. Erica, leaning in to listen instead of filling every gap with her own voice. They didn't erase the years behind us, but they marked a shift I could actually feel. One Saturday in early spring, I sat in the community garden behind our program's studio, sorting seed packets for the next planting day. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the bed near the fence. David appeared, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, and set one beside me before sitting on the edge of a planter. His gaze followed mine toward the lettuce beds, where a group of volunteers knelt in the soil. My father was among them, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands, letting a boy no older than 10 show him the right spacing for seedlings. "You've done more than rebuild a relationship," David said after a moment. "You've changed the shape of it." I thought about that. How for years I'd believed family roles were set in concrete. My father was the one who hadn't been there when I needed him. Erica was the sister who saw me as competition, not kin. And yet here we were, figuring out how to exist in each other's worlds without dragging every wound into the light every time we met. Erica still volunteered, though not every week. She showed up prepared, stayed the full time, and called ahead when she couldn't make it. We didn't revisit the wedding or rehash the years before, but we'd built a working language for the present. Updates about the kids, quick texts when someone earned a scholarship, the occasional laugh that surprised us both. With my father, the changes were smaller but steady. He began to ask about my projects without me prompting him, remembered things I'd told him weeks earlier. At events, he stayed until the end, sometimes bringing coffee for the volunteers, sometimes asking students thoughtful questions about their work. We weren't pretending the past had never happened. Instead, we were stacking enough consistent moments in the present to start outweighing the absence that came before. On our first anniversary, Ethan and I hosted a dinner. Marilyn and David were there, of course, and so was my father. At one point, I caught David watching from across the room, my father leaning in to hear Ethan describe a woodworking project, Erica smiling at something one of the kids from the program had done. David's smile was small but knowing, the look of someone who'd seen the worst chapters of this story and was now watching better ones take shape. After everyone left, Ethan found me in the kitchen, rinsing wine glasses. "You know," he said, "no one would have blamed you if you'd cut them both out for good." "I know," I answered. But then the worst moments would be the ones that decided everything else. Rebuilding hasn't been flawless. There are still reflexes that surface, my father glancing to Erica before me, or Erica slipping into her polished performance mode. But I've learned that those moments don't have to erase the progress we've made. Family, I've come to realize, isn't just the people who share your history. It's the ones who keep showing up in your present, consistently and without being begged. Sometimes they're the same people, sometimes they're not. And sometimes, if you both choose it, someone who failed you before can learn to be there now. David still calls every Sunday evening. We talk about books, the weather, and sometimes nothing at all. Before hanging up, he always says, "You're doing fine, Jasmine." And I believe him now, without hesitation. On quiet nights, I walk through the garden. The studio lights spill across the beds, catching the edges of leaves, turning the air golden for a moment before fading into dusk. I think about the aisle I walked with David's arm steady beside me, the sharp crack of truth breaking through at my reception, and the long months since, spent deciding who I could let back in and on what terms. The father who walks you down the aisle should be the one who's been walking beside you all along. On my wedding day, that was David. But now, a year later, my father is trying to walk beside me too, not perfectly, not without missteps, but with intention. And maybe that's the truest definition of family, the ones who choose, again and again, to stay, even after they've learned exactly how much it cost you when they didn't,